All right, so I did. I went to the UPS office across the street. I figured my branch manager told me that it was okay. I got 3 money orders for $250, picked out 3 random clients that hadn't agreed to do the plan. I called them, told them I was doing it as a gift, filled it out quickly, walked into my compliance manager's office. I totaled 40 plans. 2 weeks later, I got a check for 10 grand. I felt like I had schemed the system, I guess, but I figured my manager said that it was okay and I liked the bonus. And it worked. I didn't think about any ethical implications that could have followed doing that, or my colleagues who worked harder and didn't qualify for the bonus and didn't cheat. At the time, I figured it was okay. Well, after about 1.5 years at Merrill Lynch, I decided to leave. I was having a lot of success. And in the brokerage industry, there's very little loyalty. If you produce, other firms come knocking, and they did. After about 1.5 years, I jumped ship to one firm. And before I know it, I'm 25 years old, working at Bear Stearns. At the time, I was the youngest broker they had hired in that office. The problem with that was I had only been a producer for about 3 years. And I had convinced myself that I had made it in the brokerage industry by virtue of working at Bear Stearns, by virtue of my paycheck, when in reality, all I was a cold calling stockbroker. And around that time, I really started to make some decisions that was selfish and simply nothing about thinking only about me. For example, I would call a client in the evening to do a trade, and the client was reticent. He wasn't buying it. He didn't want to do it. So maybe I'd make something up, or I'd make an exaggeration, making the client feel comfortable. Then they do the trade, and then at the end of the day, maybe that trade would work out. I would get a commission, the client made money on the trade, and it was a real win-win. That's what I told myself. It was those types of decisions that slowly put me on a path, yet no one really seemed to mind at Merrill Lynch or at Bear Stearns as I continue to advance and get paid. Well, ultimately, UBS came knocking. UBS is the Swiss bank. And at the age of 26, UBS offered my senior partner and I $1 million to move our book of business. $1 million at 26 is a team. We had about 700 clients, $150 million in assets, and $1 million to split. Now, I'll tell you, I thought it was all the money in the world. I really did. I didn't realize the implications that come with taking that type of check. And working at UBS at 26 years old, I truly started to feel a great deal of pressure for the first time on a number of fronts. One, when you get a bonus of that size, when you receive a salary of that size, they really are expecting you to produce at all costs, I learned. It was a great sum of money at a young age. Two, my business partner and I really struggled to move our book of business from Bear Stearns over to UBS. The $150 million we told UBS we had, we only brought over about 60% of it. That wasn't a very big number. That, unfortunately, at the time we moved our book of business, there was a seismic change that took place in the brokerage industry. For example, when I went to UBS, I was a cold calling stockbroker. If you had a $100,000 account with me, I could cold call and I could trade that portfolio to $10,000 a year in commissions. Buying and selling stock day in and night, $10,000 a year on a $100,000 account. I liked to trade, I was good at it. UBS put this new model into place, which said they no longer wanted brokers like me trading. They wanted us to move to managed money, fixed fees. In other words, you'd pay 2% a year on your 100 grand. So instead of the $10,000 that I'd grown used to, your account's only going to pay me $2,000 with this new fixed fee model. Well, that's an $8,000 difference just in your account. Now you extrapolate that out over 150 million in assets, 700 accounts, our production fell by more than 70%. Hardly the type of production that UBS expected if they're going to give you $1 million bonus. And with that came real pressure from management, telling us about the bonus, telling us if we don't produce, there are repercussions in regards to getting fired and getting that money back because they think we had misled them with regards to our production. We didn't. We just weren't producing as much. They didn't give us time to make it right. And my business partner and I grew very scared, looking for any opportunity to fill the gap in commissions at UBS. And the opportunity to fill that gap, to make up for the 60% reduction in commissions, came about a year after I went to UBS in June of 2002. In June of 2002, I received a call from a gentleman named Keith. Keith was a hedge fund manager that had $6 million under management at Bear Stearns. $6 million bucks. And at that time, my book of business was comprised of professional athletes, individual investors, and hedge fund managers. And when Keith called me to transfer in that $6 million account, my business partner and I were very excited. We were very excited because we knew that Keith would trade aggressively and generate tons of commissions. And he did. He did. But I should tell you something that's worth noting when I agreed to take Keith's $6 million. When I took Keith's $6 million, I told Kenny, I told my boss, I told everyone, truthfully. I knew that Keith was an unethical, unscrupulous business manager. I worked with Keith six years earlier when I got into the brokerage business. He worked in the cubicle right next door to me. I heard things that Keith would say on the phone to close a deal. I heard him lying. I heard him cheating. I heard him say anything to close a deal. I say that because when Keith called me 6 years later to transfer his account, I knew that he was a dishonest businessman. I never should have accepted his portfolio. I knew that something bad would happen that day. I knew it, the day I took his $6 million. Well, those feelings I had about doing business with him didn't stop me from accepting his money. I knew how much in commissions he would generate. I knew he would fill the gap, and I knew I would have secured my position at UBS and I could start to advance again. We transferred in the $6 million. That first month he did $25,000 in commissions. The second month he did $50,000 in commissions. The third month he did nearly $100,000. That was a lot of production. It was a lot of business. Now my senior business partner, who I was always feuding with, starts to tell me that he's thinking about giving me a raise, which is something I had wanted for so long. He's talking about a raise. Well, while my client is doing a lot of these commissions, something interesting is happening. Every penny that my client raised over that first 6 months and then a year, he lost. $12 million in the first year, he lost all of it. All gone. Now I should tell you, my experience alone, an experience that you would have picked up on as well, my experience alone should have told me that you cannot raise $12 million from individual investors if you're losing money. No one in their right mind would turn your money over to a portfolio manager that had lost 100%. Don't do it. We saw these losses. We saw the money raised. That was the first sign that something was going on. It's the first thing the FBI wanted to discuss with me. Did you not think there was something wrong with those losses in the first year? Truthfully, all I cared about was the production and the commissions, and I was starting to hit my quota. I wasn't necessarily thinking about the losses. Well, after about another year, my client continued to raise money. He continued to lose money. For the first 2 years, I never saw an investor. All I did was execute his trades when he'd call in the morning, though I knew about the losses, and I continued to take the commissions. Well, after about 2 years, my client started to struggle to raise money, and that's when he needed the help of the stockbroker, the broker at the big UBS. And my client called me and said, I'm on my way down to your office. And he was coming down with a gentleman named John Farrar, a very nice man. John Farrar was a little older investor who was contemplating giving $4 million to my client, the hedge fund manager. $4 million. Keith, my client, called and said, I need you to attend this meeting to talk a little bit about UBS. The client wants to know where his assets are going to be housed. And I told my client, I'm very uncomfortable attending this meeting. I'm not sure it's right for me. I had never seen an investor's face before. He said, it's too late, we're on our way down. So after about an hour or so, they walk into my office, and my senior business partner, Kenny, looks at John Farrar, the prospect, and said to John, so why are you contemplating giving $4 million to our client, Keith? Why do you want to turn over your $4 million? And John looked us directly in the eyes and said, well, Kenny and Justin, you've seen the rate of return the hedge fund is delivering. Performance sells itself. Now, clearly, we knew that our client had lost every penny that he had raised. And he was referencing a performance that didn't exist. And I looked at my partner, Kenny, and said, we don't want to ask those sorts of questions. And my tendency in life is to talk too much and write too much. I don't know when to shut up at times. I kept my mouth shut that whole meeting. I just kept my mouth shut. I never corrected the investor as he was going to deposit $4 million. I didn't correct him. I just kept my mouth shut, thinking if I said nothing that it was okay. My mouth shut. I said maybe 4 words that whole meeting. Nothing. But the next day, that $4 million deposit came in. Well, right around this time that this money was coming in, knowing that this investor would lose it, I grew to be very concerned and very scared. Scared because I didn't want to be sued not if but when my clients' investors continue to lose every penny.